Okay, so welcome to the last of the Data and AI in Society lecture this semester, and we'll resume in September. So before I introduce our speakers, Dr. Morenoff and Dr. Van Berkel, I'll say a few quick things. I want to kind of skip this because if you've been to some of our lectures, you know who we are, the Michigan Institute for Data and AI in Society, the campus-wide organization for data science and AI. And so I also want to skip this, except the last bit. We do research, we do training, we develop research capacity, we build programs to improve or to enhance the impact of scientific research on society. Okay, so this lecture series, this is the last one, as I just mentioned. This is for people at the University of Michigan who want to explore hands-on tutorials for AI. But I actually want to say a little bit about the data and AI for social good effort that we have been doing, which really is the focus of today's lecture. So really, we have been doing data and AI for social good projects since many years ago, since I got to Midas. Really, it's about using technology to improve government decision-making, to improve government service, and to support our communities. And another thing these days, it's actually more important even, is to help the public have a voice in the design and development of these technologies, because these technologies eventually will impact them. So we want to help the community to not just be an end user, but also to have a voice at the table. So we've worked with, for example, the city of Detroit, helping with their digital inclusion efforts, and assessing youth programs and assessing various government programs. We work with Native American tribal nations, help them improve their data systems and to protect their data sovereignty. We work with various counties in the area. And so, today's talk really is a good example of how technology can be used for social good, how university researchers can play a role in this domain, and how community university alliance can be very important. And so I welcome all of you today or later on, reach out to us if you have ideas of how we can work with the community and support our community. And so today, I want to welcome two speakers, Dr. Derek Van Berkel, who is Associate Professor in the School of Environment and Sustainability. And Dr. Van Berkel's research is really about landscape management, sustainable and resilient communities. For example, his recent work is about the impact of climate migration on city growth. And so Dr. Jeff Morenoff is a professor and associate dean for research at the Ford School of Public Policy. And Dr. Morenoff's research is about communities well-being, community and crime, community and many other factors for so I first got to know Dr. Morenoff really through his work about supporting the Detroit challenge of the 2020 U.S. Census, and also about the Metro, what's it called, the Metro Detroit something. Detroit Metro Area Community Study. That's right, a very long time community study that he has been leading. So it's. For me, it's really exciting for the two of them to be here today to see how such work is really benefiting Detroit and other communities.
Hi, everybody. I just want to thank everybody for coming. I know those in Ann Arbor had a bit of a rude awakening a couple nights ago with some of the inclement weather. And last night I was doing some sawing of a neighbor's tree, and so I'm sure that people are kind of busy with those kinds of things. I really wanted to thank the folks coming from Detroit, some familiar faces that have actually worked on the project and coming all the way from Detroit. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here. And then I have some colleagues here that I just I appreciate the support, and some friends. So today, this is a project that Jeff and I have been working on for around, and I'm saying just Jeff and I, but it has been a kind of a dual project, a kind of equal project with the city for around a year and a half now. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. I think many in the room are quite familiar with some of the vacancy issues, the fact that there are houses that are vacant in Detroit, and there are some challenges with that. And the title of this kind of talks a little bit about vacancy to vision, and so I think there's been a lot of talk about what to do next with these kind of vacant lands, or these homes that have kind of fallen into disrepair. But vision also has a double meaning, because we're actually using these technologies, something called computer vision, which is an AI that we're kind of exploring how we might use that in this context. Okay, so Jeff is here today. I'm going to be doing the talk, but Jeff is definitely present in this presentation, and as are the folks from Detroit. I feel a little bit intimidated because Jeff is more of an expert, and there's experts in the field in the room about Detroit. So I'm going to try to do justice to kind of describing things. I also want to talk a little bit about my own research perspectives and how these kind of collaborations can work, and why we think we should do this, okay? So I would say, bear with me, I'm going to try to tell a story, but there are different parts of that story, and I hope to kind of have some cohesiveness. We'll see, okay? So if you have any questions, if I'm unclear, you can shout out and say, I don't understand that, but I'm also happy to answer questions at the end. So I work in this building. This is the School for Environment and Sustainability. And the folks here, the faculty, the scientists, we deal with a lot of these big challenges. So we deal with thinking about how to prepare for some of the stressors that we know are going to become increasingly frequent and maybe intense, as the kind of tornado in Ann Arbor kind of showed us. But we're dealing with all sorts of stressors. I'm really interested in climate migration, and this idea that folks that are kind of exposed to very acute stressors from climate change might be moving away and maybe coming to our region, okay? But there's other stressors that folks in this building are also interested in. And kind of related to that, we are thinking about how we start to make or support decisions into making us more prepared for these stressors, okay? And so this is kind of the part of the kind of jargon, a little bit of scientific talk, but the idea that we have is that we have to have more actionable knowledge, okay? So there is a lot of science that is just science for kind of a fundamental, looking at the physics of things, looking at the fundamental science of things. But some of the folks in science are trying to say, well, maybe we should kind of orient ourselves to more actionable knowledge, trying to understand the needs and the challenges of the people that are trying to prepare for some of these stressors. And some of the idea is that we have closer connections with those folks, that we start to talk with them and try to understand their challenges, okay? And there's a kind of a gradient of how much we do that. Some of it is not at all. But what we're really trying to do is really get to something called co-production, which is getting basically scientists and people making those decisions together to come up with and support decisions that they're going to be making. And so this is a science that is becoming increasingly talked about, and how do we do this? What should we do? So how can we do this most effectively? And the other thing about that is other scientists are saying, well, when we do this kind of science, it takes a lot of effort. It's really important to do that, but it's kind of challenging to kind of diffuse or increase the impact that we have through this co-production, where we start to talk to people and their problems. Because there's a lot of problems, and we cannot, there's a few scientists, and we cannot do all of them, okay? So we're thinking about different ways that we can support that. So one of those ways might be to collaborate with a city and learn really deeply about their challenges, and then try to support those challenges, and then maybe that support can diffuse to other cities, okay? You might also think about tools that could kind of spread knowledge and then make it kind of spread out so that you can have more knowledge of how to kind of deal with these stressors. You might also think about influencing very influential people and saying, yeah, maybe they can kind of spread that knowledge, okay? So I want you to think over the past 20 years, this is the participatory part of this, what is a scientific knowledge or a tool that has really changed society or has been kind of adopted by society? Just think in your brains about what that might be, okay? So my own reflection on that is a couple of things. So I come from Canada, and in Canada, I remember when I was young, there was a lot of smoking at the time, and the government basically said, we know that smoking causes cancer, and so what we're gonna do is we're gonna put these very harsh images of what the causes of smoking are so that you could influence people and say, maybe you have to stop smoking. And it was really, really, really successful. So this is kind of an example of science kind of changing the things that we do. I mean, a local example is No Mow May, that we're kind of, I don't know if we're gearing up because I don't know if the grass is growing or anything right now. I always think about Movember, that has really kind of raised the idea of men's health and that sort of thing. And I also think about the technologies, the tools that have developed and really changed our relationship with how we gain knowledge. So this is an example of the first cell phone, and now I think probably many of you in this room have a cell phone, and you get a lot of knowledge from that. So the next big cell phone, I would say, or the thing that is probably of influence, maybe for many of you in this room, whether that's editing an email or searching a complex topic, is these interactive AIs, right? So it's trying to mimic interaction with a different human being, but it's a little different than that, right? Because it has the knowledge of all kind of records in the internet or how it was trained, okay? So I think probably most of you have experimented with that. And it really kind of sets off kind of our discussion about how we get knowledge and how we can kind of use these tools at the same time. So I know I use this to help me quite a bit. The other thing that I kind of want to surface or try to think about is, I never realized this when I went to the website, but it basically is saying, ready when you are, and the website is saying, you know, like I want to have that prompt. But it kind of struck me one time that it's also this kind of double meaning for me, at least. Are we ready for AI? Are we ready for some of the implications of AI? And I think the answer for that is that there's a lot of question marks about that, right? We have question marks about the computation that it's going to take, kind of the environmental impacts of those. We're also questioning whether AI is correct or not. And then there's this kind of economic question of, are we going to be losing jobs? Okay, so there's a lot of questions kind of societally about AI. And this is kind of reflected in when you do polls of folks in the US. What are their thoughts? And many folks are concerned, and they're more concerned than they are excited about AI. And then that is kind of the counterpoint, is that experts, or I guess, folks from universities and that sort of thing, are more positive about this, okay? So, and I am a bit positive about this, okay? So one of the things, I am a geographer, and I teach students how to make maps. And this is a big challenge. When I first started doing this, it was a very challenging thing to make a simple map. You had to get the coordinates of the locations. You had to put it in a data format that could be read by a very specific software. And now, I kid you not, and I could do a demonstration. I don't think we have the time for that. But I put in maybe three simple prompts into our very basic chat that we have at the university. And I made a map of all the places that I had lived within, I guess, the last couple of years, okay? And that took maybe 1 minute, okay? So while our society is questioning the kind of the implications of AI, there's also a thought that it is quite valuable, okay? And maybe you can think of your own applications, okay? Okay, so that was a little bit long-winded. I'm maybe losing some folks, but I just want to have that as a frame of reference for kind of telling the story about our kind of application here, okay? So just think about how we might co-produce knowledge and how we as a society might kind of think about AI more in general, okay? So the story begins with Midas. So a year and a half ago, Midas sponsored an event where it took folks from the city of Detroit, Microsoft, and the University of Michigan. And I thought, okay, this is great. This is co-production of knowledge. We're going to learn a lot of stuff. Often those things, sometimes they can result in interesting things and sometimes not. Midas, we call this in science kind of this boundary spanning object, because it actually takes these people together to help us co-produce this knowledge, okay? And so this is just some pictures from that. Okay, so I'm paraphrasing somebody in the room, so hopefully they don't feel too offended. But at some point we were sitting together and we were tasked with thinking about projects that we could do to support the city, okay? And at some point I just said, what is one of the biggest challenges of your job, okay? And they basically said, each year we conduct a housing condition assessment across all homes in the city. It takes a lot of time, and it requires multiple staff, and I don't like doing it. We document conditions by taking photos, using Street View, and evaluating the state of each property. While assessing physical conditions is important, what we're really trying to determine is whether homes are occupied, which is much more challenging. To do this, we look at the presence of cars, garbage bins, and the property upkeep. And this information is really valuable to this city, okay? So this is a process that they do. They take these photos and they try to maintain a database. And you can imagine that this is very resource intensive because people are looking at these photos, they're putting it in a database, okay? That set off alarm bells in my head because I thought, well, this is great because this is really close to some of the research that I do. So I'm very interested in where people go and engage in nature. And so what we do is we take big social media data sets, we take their location, and then we use the photographs that they take to understand a little bit more of what they're doing in nature, okay? So this is all based on a premise of something called computer vision, okay? And so I'm trying to explain a little bit about how computer vision works. Our eyes are really good at deciphering and looking and saying, this is my model, I know that this is an orange, or I know that this is an apple. Because we have these very complex calculations happening. We know this is a round fruit, one is red and one is orange. And so we have these models that our brain does very, very quickly. That's a little challenging for a computer. But what a computer can do is it can take a photograph like this. This is my dog. And it can take some of the different parts of that photograph and kind of look at all those different parts. So this is just an example. You can look at shape or edges and texture and color, and you can turn it into a mathematical model. And then what you can do then is you could say, I am using kind of the structure of our brain, this neural net, and I'm going to tell the computer that all the shapes that look like mountains or trees, this is what they look like. So I'm going to look at the edges and the shapes and all those things, and I'm going to tell the computer, guess what? Look at all those different layers, and I'm going to describe, for instance, what a mountain looks like. It's gray, it's kind of craggy, it has this kind of shape. And then it can say, I looked at this dog, and it doesn't have those qualities. It doesn't have those qualities. And so it's basically the computer is saying, no, this is a dog. And the same thing if you had another image of nature or something like that, okay? So that's a very basic way to say it, but that's essentially how computer vision works. When we were sitting down, I started to learn about, although we did know about this wonderful program called the Street View program in Detroit, okay? And so what the city has done is they have this specialized car, and they drive all over the city, and they have a camera on it, and they collect photographs for each of the houses as it goes by, okay? So we've used this in our classes because we think it's really interesting to look at these photos and use them in kind of new and innovative ways. But I thought, well, we could actually use this existing data in our computer vision to help doing these assessments, okay? Okay, so that's the premise. That was kind of what triggered things. I want to go back and then start to talk a little bit about why this is so important. And again, I'm a little nervous because Jeff is the person that knows most about this, and it was mentioned already, and there's many people that know much more than this, okay? So around 2000, there was a realization that there was an undercount of the census within Detroit. And maybe some of you read about this, or you kind of have a vague understanding of this. And basically what the government did is they said, we want to challenge the census, okay? So Jeff was really very much involved in this, and so he did some studies, and he looked at this part of the population within Detroit, and he said, well, this is weird. How does the population go from 2019 to 2020? It just dips like crazy when this past trend was not that crazy, okay? So, and we have kind of intermediate models that project where population is going, and he basically said, this is not right, I don't think, and he did some analysis, and I like this quote from him, and what he said is like, when we saw the new numbers, it baffled us. If this were a football game and I were a coach, I would definitely throw a challenge flag, okay? And so he hopes that they can kind of uncover like what's going on with this, okay? So basically what had happened is he thinks that the address roles that the Census Bureau has is very much different than what's actually on the ground, okay? And so Jeff has been talking in Senate and talking to people and saying, I think this is a problem, and he's been publishing on this. And the other thing that he kind of tries to think about is that when you undercount a census, there's a big implications because federal tax dollars and tax dollars are allocated based on population. And so if you have an undercount, you're getting less resources. And what's more, you might have less representation because there's lower population in a region, and then what happens is you say, well, you don't have to be as representative, so you have less maybe people in Congress, okay? So it becomes a bit of a civil rights issue. If you want to talk to Jeff about this, I'm sure he can share a little bit more. So this really set off kind of a process of saying, we're going to challenge the census, and the city basically, there's a mechanism at the Census Bureau. It's called a local update of census addresses. And basically what it allows you to do is to compare your own assessment, the community's assessment, maybe the city's assessment of the address rolls with the actual census. So what has happened is the Census Bureau puts out a list of the addresses, and then the city says, well, this is what we found out, and then they kind of give it back to the census, and whether or not they accept it or not is, I'm not really sure, okay? Okay, so I said this was going to be a little bit circuitous, but I also want to talk a little bit about the broader challenges and how we got here with the fact that there is a lot of vacancy in Detroit. This is something that I'm very interested in, and it's kind of the broader challenge of Great Lakes cities and population, okay? So if you look at this map, this is, and all these red areas, the majority of the Great Lakes is either decreasing in population or kind of staying the same, okay? So it's kind of staying the same. If you kind of track what happened in Michigan and some of the Great Lakes cities, we have this kind of huge uptick of population from the Great Migration from the south, and folks were coming in to do work in the plants, in Ford's plants and that sort of thing. And then what happened is those jobs were offshored, okay? So people didn't have any jobs anymore, and some people have moved away, but it also kind of started this trend of kind of vacant houses, okay? If we kind of drill down a little bit more, we can kind of look at how the population changed over time. Here's a simple representation, and so you had at the peak around the 50s, and then it started going down. But spatially, what you can see is you had kind of a vibrant downtown, and then it was spreading out suburbanization, and then the 50s hit, and then all of a sudden jobs started disappearing, and there was less population, okay? So the landscape itself has drastically altered, as people are probably very familiar with, that houses that were inhabited become uninhabited and not maintained and kind of in disrepair. Okay? So this is a big challenge for the city of Detroit. And they do these amazing assessments where they look at the different housing units and they estimate how much vacancy rate there is. And they're trying to address, through interventions, what they can do with this, okay? We know we don't want to kind of disappear the people that are leaving because, I think we realize that these used to be communities. These used to be places that people called home, and the identity of those communities have kind of eroded. And so this is a big challenge for the city itself and also the public itself. But we also realize that these vacant homes are somewhat of a public health risk. Okay, so we know that many of them had lead or asbestos, and with their demolition, some of that went into the soils. Just having some of these houses can cause respiratory and infectious risks. We know that there's dumping and pests that are associated with those vacant homes. And I would also think that there's folks in this school that are looking at some of the psychological impacts of kind of these diminishing conditions. Okay, so the city has tried and is doing many initiatives to think about what to do with this land, of course. So some of them is going into agriculture. There's also kind of some remediation that's happening. So that brings us to the land bank. And so the land bank basically owns many of these vacant lands, okay? And they're basically tasked with figuring out how to decrease blight and increase occupancy. And I don't know, we know the folks at the land bank, and they do a very good job, and I don't know if I can do justice to explaining all about the Detroit Land Bank, but this is kind of what I know, that they have properties that you can buy. They're really trying to allow or prevent kind of speculation, so they allow people to take adjacent lands to their house for kind of agriculture and that sort of thing. And so I think it's a really big challenge that they're trying to face, but they also need information about this, okay? So in addition to supporting the LUCA process, we're also thinking about supporting this process, okay? So I'm looking at my time, I'm pretty good. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a palate cleanser, and I want to put you in the role of an assessor. So I want you, this is kind of approximately what an assessor might have. They have these images, and I want to maybe in your mind think about how you would assess this house. What are the conditions? What's going on with this house? So there's a lot of things that we can kind of consider. We have some damage here. We have damage to the facade. It seems like the windows and the door are somewhat intact. We have a problem with the stairs, and it's kind of becoming overgrown. I mean, how severe would you say this is? I mean, it's kind of a challenge for us to have a measure of how severe this is. The other thing is, do people live in here? It's a big challenge to think about. And that is where we're going to start up the story about the University of Michigan and city collaboration. So I'm really honored to be able to say that we're co-producing this knowledge together with them. And so what we have been doing is we've been meeting monthly. We've been trying to get internal funds to support this research. And like a lot of these co-production of knowledge, what we're trying to define between the two of us is what we can do to support, but also what their challenges are, what the city's challenges are, but also how we should structure this project, okay? So I'm just going to go through a few things that we have started to talk about and think about when we're doing this project. Okay, so the big goal is to support this annual assessment of housing conditions throughout the city. Okay, so that will reduce the labor load of doing this manually, so that you don't have to have a lot of people to look at those houses and make their assessment. So that's one of the goals. We also want to support their existing decision framework, okay? So we don't want to take the people that are experts and looking at those houses out of the loop. We want to make sure that they are supported by the technology, but it's not supplanting their understanding or their knowledge of that, okay? There are different kinds of data that the city has, and we're trying to figure out how to integrate these technologies within their pipelines. We're also very cognizant of community sensitivities. Use of AI in the community might be seen as intrusive. How do we use this correctly? One of the other things that we're really talking about is these seem like very valuable tools, and the city itself thinks it might be valuable to share with other communities throughout Detroit and the US. And then the final thing that we're thinking about is how might AI be used in other city departments, okay? So, and this has been conversations over almost a year and a half thinking about this, trying to create technology that fits these needs, okay? So luckily enough, and I've mentioned this before, the city has this really rich data set already of folks, these assessors who have looked at this information already, and they have this rich data set, okay? So we are also tapping into the knowledge of Detroit. It's not only one way where the University of Michigan is lending their knowledge, okay? Okay, so just a reminder, the idea is to be able to assess every house within Detroit, okay? There are some constraints. It's hard for us to do kind of apartment or condo buildings, so we can't do everything, but at least this would be one effort to reduce the task of doing this assessment, okay? Okay, so when we first started this, the first thing that we wanted to do is use something called a vision language model. And so it's the exact same thing that you might be using already in AI in your chatbot. And those models already have the capability, if you want, to upload a picture, and it can tell you a little bit about that picture. So a vision model kind of combines an ability to assess what's in an image with kind of natural ways of describing it and interacting with the user, okay? So it's just an extension of something like this language model, okay? So when I uploaded this one, and I was asking, is there a missing window? And you can see that it has a very complex explanation of this, okay? So it does a pretty good job. And we were really interested, could we just set up one of these models to support the upcoming assessment? Okay, so I think it was done in around October. We're thinking, okay, can we create all these models to support this? We thought, oh, let's just try this to begin with, okay? So this is a student that I work with quite closely. His name is Xiaohao Yang, and he came up with this what's called urban worm, okay? So we call this tool that we've developed urban worm, and basically what it does is it takes an image and it tells, and you can prompt and ask it, is there a hole in this building or not, okay? One thing that's really interesting about Zhao Hao is he's very interested in sound and other like social media, so he's also integrated that. So if there's available sound or if there's social media at that location, it can also assess that. And you can ask, what does it sound like there? Or what is the social media talking about in those locations, okay? So I thought it would be great to have this as an icon. He decided on this. I thought the kids would love this, you know, like an urban worm. Okay. So one of the goals was to basically integrate these kinds of tools within existing pipelines. And so what Zhao Hao was able to do is put it on what's called a GitHub repository. And so this is publicly available. Anybody can download this code and use it, okay? So this is part of making it accessible to the city of Detroit, but also maybe other cities, okay? So yes, and the city is already trying to integrate this into their workflows, and so that was just a recent development, and so we're trying to figure out if this is working or not, okay? Okay. So I want to go a little bit more into how this actually works so that it's very clear. So what we do is we take the street view that the city of Detroit has collected, and then we use a model, and we actually are looking at 3 things, because these have already been defined by the city. Is it bordered up? Is there facade damage? Is there damage to the roof? Okay, so this is really the key indicators that they have developed to kind of look at the conditions of the home. And so we have adopted those, so we're trying to use the same pipelines that they do. We don't use an interface like this. We actually use kind of code in the background. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that the model was doing a good job. And so I talked a little bit about the great hard work that the city of Detroit has already done. They already have images of houses, and then they have assessments of those conditions. So what we're able to do is ask the model to say, hey, is this boarded up? Is there facade damage? And we were able to try to see how the performance of the model was, to validate if this was going to give good information to the city or not. Okay, so that was a really valuable part of the project. For the people that are more computer scientists, these are the models that we compared, and we're actually doing some other models. It might not say too much to you, but there's different kinds of models that have been developed, some from different companies and kind of different developers. So we're trying to compare which one is the best, okay? So another thing that I want to mention is that it was a challenge to get the street view imagery. It's a wonderful data set. It's a huge amount of data. And so you have often multiple views, and you have to figure out how best to get the correct view, okay? So this is a little bit challenging, but you actually want to get to this view where you can do the assessment of the house. And because we cannot invest a lot of time to manually do that, we have to try to figure that out, how to do that with the computer. And so we spend a lot of time trying to get the most accurate data. So what actually ended up happening is that we have over 200,000 addresses for the city. And then we have an average of about 3 images for each of those homes, those addresses, okay? So we have all of that information, and now we're able to hopefully use the model to kind of understand the condition of those homes, okay? So one thing, this is kind of what it looks like. You might have a photo like this. And again, computer vision, or the way that the computer looks at it, it can be challenging. Here, it identified one opening in the facade, okay? These ones, although there's kind of overgrown trees and that sort of thing, it didn't identify some of those key features that we were looking at. And so what this can do, and we're trying to figure out how best to do this, is introduce a little bit of noise. So if you have two images that there's no problem, and you have one, how do we kind of reconcile that? Okay, so that's a challenge that we're trying to think about. Okay, so the previous one, the previous example that I showed, we basically just used the existing model. We just said, these are probably good models. Let's see if it will do a good job, okay? There's another way to go about this challenge, and it is the exact same thing, but instead of just relying on that existing model to be able to identify a hole in the house or something like that, you actually can provide it with images of houses that are boarded up or damaged with their facade, okay? So you can actually say, hey, this is what that problem or this thing that we're trying to classify looks like. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of images so you learn what that looks like, okay? And so that's the second part of the process that we're doing. This, I think, from the city's perspective, the first part was fine. We wanted to kind of, from a scientific perspective, see if we could do, and kind of curiosity, if we could do this better, okay? And so we also wanted to validate if we were doing a better job, okay? And so this is basically the output of what it might look like. You're looking at different addresses, and you're looking at kind of an output for each of those homes. What we're looking at is those different damage indicators, hole in the roof, boarded up, or kind of a missing window. And we're also asking, how severe is that damage? Okay, and so this is just an example. One of the things that we really wanted to address is some concerns by the city that that data, if we went through a software or online AI system, that we would keep everything anonymous. We didn't want to provide that data to an open AI or a big company like that. So what we do is we actually run this on our own computers. And so it's not exposed to the bigger AI LLM models, okay? We also found it to be a little bit more cost effective, and it's something that I think the city can actually adopt, okay? Okay, so we're running out of time, but I think we're doing okay. When we do this kind of model comparison, what we want to know is how well the model predicted it to the actual values. And so what we're trying to say is, hey, these assessors are really smart. Can we compare their assessments with what we do in the predicted values, okay? And so this is, we're really happy if they find the things that we're looking for, or they agree that there's nothing, like not a broken facade or something like that. What the challenge is that sometimes the assessor will say, well, this is not a problem, where the model will, or the model the model will say that this is a problem, whereas the assessor will not, okay? And so this is just a way that we try to assess the validity of our models, okay? And I don't want to go too long into this, but just to say that this blue line is the original model, where we didn't give it any information to help it understand if there was a hole in the roof or something like that, okay? And this yellow, or this orange line, is the one where we gave it more information. And what you can see is that they do much better, okay? The other interesting thing is that these kind of every third line, which is not a great data visualization, but that's when we're asking about the severity. So it's kind of a subjective thing. And here, when you train them, it gets much better because you're using experts to actually say, yeah, this is how severe it is, okay? So this is a good thing. And we're quite happy about the performance now, okay? So what this allows us to do is to compare across models, and if there's agreement at specific houses, and so that can help us to understand if the model is doing a good job or not. We also can get this probability. So this probability can be fed into the city assessment and say, hey, let's look at ones that have high probability for having damage of some sort, and let's only look at those houses manually, okay? And so that reduces the amount of work that kind of a visual inspection might have to do, okay? So we're happy about this, okay. So all in all, if I'm going to assess this project, I think we are kind of at this stage where we're at a stage where we're hopefully supporting this assessment, and we're creating these tools where you can have kind of the assessor helping out and being in the loop of that assessment. We're really happy that what's happening now is that the folks at the city are able to integrate these tools, and hopefully it will help them with the assessment. We still need to work, or we're continuing our efforts on thinking about community sensitivities, kind of scaling it up, and then support for other city departments, okay? So right now what we're doing is we're actually looking at different kinds of models. So we still have to do the Mistral model, and we're actually looking at some kind of basic computer vision models, the kind of original computer vision models, to see if they could help us as well, okay? So we're working on those. The idea is to get into a kind of automated workflow where we're updating this map annually to support their assessment, okay? We're also, as geographers, really interested, could we use satellite imagery to help us assess the roofs and see if there's things that we can identify of a roof, okay? I think the other things about thinking about community sensitivity, I think we need to continually engage with our partners at the city, and also community members, to think about how we use AI, and try to communicate, some potential negative outcomes from this, okay? And so we are thinking about these, and I think it's a continuing effort, okay? The other thing, and we're going to be meeting in around 2 weeks to discuss this more in depth, is that we think that our methodology, we could actually do other things. So the city, for instance, is really interested in trying to understand other things within their data set. So could we kind of assess the state of sidewalks, or could we look at things like back alleys and that sort of thing? I think there is a lot of an appetite for maybe saying, okay, can we test this in Detroit, and then maybe we can support other cities in doing similar assessments. And then I think conversations are ongoing about how AI supports city and public functions, these other public functions, okay? One of the things, and this is maybe somewhat related, but it's also something that we do in our lab, and thinking about planning and management of city housing and infrastructure. So we're actually developing something called the pivot model, and the idea is to be able to look at the buildings in your city, try to compare your city with different cities, and understanding kind of density and the qualities of those cities, but also have planning tools where you can visualize and see different buildings within the city infrastructure. I'm not going to go into that too deep. If you're really interested, I can kind of give a demonstration, and it's called the pivot model. So I'm kind of excited about that, and wondering, can we use these vision tools to have kind of immersive understanding of where these challenges are, and can we start planning and managing those, okay? Okay. Okay. So, I mean, I think there's a kind of broader conclusions that we can make kind of from a scientific perspective. We think we know better how these models work and how they can be applied in this context. But I wanted to make it a bit more, I don't know, reflective of the title of the Midas series. It's Data and AI in Society. So my own personal reflection is I find it extremely gratifying to be able to work with folks from the city and learn from them, but also hopefully share some of my expertise and support their efforts. Okay. In terms of like the city-university collaboration, I would say that it takes a lot of effort, and the technical effort is very high, but also the effort to keep engaged is very high. And it's effort from my perspective, but I have to put a lot of effort into it, but it's also a big ask for the city as well. So this is, I think, a challenge that we often face is how do we keep this going? And so hopefully we learn a little bit about that. And the other reflection, I guess, is that I think AI has taken on a certain inevitability, which has kind of carried over a momentum of that we're going to have AI in our society, and specifically a lot of these kind of interactions online where we're looking at getting information from these chatbots and these LLMs. And I think now is the time to try to shape how that relationship is and how we think we want to kind of move forward with that knowledge discovery or that knowledge production. I'm hopeful that the science and this public cooperation will be a good start for trying to chart that course. So those are my reflections on this. I will say thank you, and I think we are out of time. So happy to take some questions, and I think
thank you for your talk. One thing that's going to be important if you want your model to have more meat on the bone or to be something other than a superficial, does it have, because a drone can tell you if the roof is on or off, right? In order for this to be really helpful both to the city and also to the public, you want to make sure that you have enough experts in the field for each of those 200,000 or however many houses you have to add depth to what your AI model is doing. And that would include, does this house have a solid foundation? Not just a roof on it, over it.
Yeah.
And second, is there electricity and is there plumbing?
Okay.
Or has it been stripped? If you can do roof, foundation, electricity, and plumbing, this would have amazing qualities, and it would be more valuable to everybody concerned. And the ways that you could either entice citizens to purchase or invest in a house, or whether the city should just bulldoze it. And otherwise, I don't really see the value.
Okay.
But once AI can do those things, you guys are going to be humming. So thank you very much.
Thanks for your comment. Maybe we can let these folks, they got to go somewhere.
Thank you.
I thank you for your comment. I think my reflection on that is that the city is already looking into these, enriching their database with that. And that is not part of what we're doing, but I know specifically that some of the things that you're talking about is what the city is also interested in. So, very helpful comment.
Yeah, thanks very much. I was wondering if you guys did any like retrospective analysis, like comparing maybe the previous analyses of the photos of the houses, like doing that with AI also, and seeing like how did it compare versus the humans doing it versus the AI doing it.
Yeah, so that is the validation that we did. So when we did the very first model, we said, how does the model look at this? And then we compared it with the assessors, the human assessors. So we have done that. And that's how we get our validation, our performance scores. We're seeing how well we did compared to trained assessors. So we did that, yeah. Gotcha.
Hi, Derek.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. So I was thinking, because like even the most substantial agreement between the model assessment and human like annotation, it's still like even it reached like 0.9 or so, like F1 score or so, it's still there is a discrepancy between the model prediction versus like the reality. So when we utilize the model prediction as a result for the downstream analysis, how could we deal with the propagate of the this kind of error, and to like try to avoid more what we call like large language model hacking issue? Yeah, that's like my core question. Yeah.
Well, okay, so first of all, we look at the LMs with a lot of skepticism. And so the idea is to support the manual assessment. It's not to prescribe. There is obviously a challenge that maybe we're missing a lot. And then if you say, oh, it's 0.6 probability that it's, there's a problem with it, and something at a different probability score there is a problem, there could be less attention paid to that. But I think the city is quite aware of the limitations. They're just trying to support this very labor-intensive process. So I think they're going to still do these assessments. It's just going to be part of their overall process. Okay. Somebody over here had a question, maybe? Okay.
So one of the questions that I have is, as you're gathering this data, is there a way that you could actually take the information about like what is wrong with these houses and put it into some sort of database that if people had materials that they could donate to help repair some of these houses? Like, for example, I'm doing a remodeling project right now, and I have windows that I'm taking out of a house that probably somebody could use, but they don't match my other windows that I'm getting. And there might be a way that those windows would be perfectly fine in somebody's house that has boards on their window and they would fit. So I'm just wondering if there's any type of movement underway to say, like, can we use this data to like get it out to people who might have leftover materials or Habitat for Humanity or what have you, and then get product to these people to help improve their house?
What a wonderful idea. We haven't thought about that. That's why, engaging with the community is a very important thing. I think how public these results can be is still a question that we're trying to figure out, because kind of the framing I was thinking about or kind of talked about is that people are kind of thinking about AI and they're looking at it with a lot of skepticism. So there's a challenge, kind of a public-facing challenge to say, well, we did this with AI. How does the public kind of perceive that? So I think it's something that the city and the university really has to start to talk about, and like how do we frame and make these kind of findings public. Obviously, in this situation, I'm making some of it public, but there are these sensitivities around that. I think that would be a a wonderful project and something that should be done. I think we have to think really hard about how we make this public.
Thank you, Derek, for the talk. It's a really interesting project. I guess maybe I will pick up on this point a little bit more in terms of, as you rightly, said, that there's a lot of skepticism from the public, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are really concerned about AI, of course. I guess part of the communication with the public as well, I guess like a deeper understanding of the social implications of this work that you're doing, right? And how the local communities might actually perceive it, right? And it's something that I think you mentioned it a few times in your talk, but you didn't really elaborate on it. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, maybe you don't have like fully fleshed out thoughts, but I'm just curious about your own reflection, interacting with the city, with the public. Mm-hmm. What are some of the concerns that you've seen on the ground as you're doing this work?
Okay. So I'm just going to preface this that we do a lot of community engagement in my other role in other projects. And the first thing I would say is that when you do community engagement is extremely enriching because you learn a lot of things that you may have had blinders on. You don't understand the full implication, the full social implications, right? So it's a very enriching thing. I think with this science of co-production, we've kind of raced to include communities and the effort that it takes to include this, it should not be understated. But also the effort to do it well shouldn't be understated. It is really challenging to keep and have meaningful conversations from a project perspective. You might have funding for maybe 4 years. That's a really good funding model. And so we're always very careful about engagement with community members and that sort of thing, because what can happen at universities is you do the project, you get busy, you're doing teaching, and then you kind of, that engagement languishes. So we're very, very careful about that. So the other model that we started to think about is that universities aren't that great at engagement with communities. There's other people, there's community-based organizations, there's cities themselves that are much better at doing that. Okay, they're much better at doing that because they stay at the city or they're in the community themselves. They are community members. And so that is a different kind of model that we're thinking about, and that says, okay, that's a bit of there's an intermediator there. There's a boundary spanning. It helps us do that engagement. Now, I think the city right now is very interested in these conversations, but at the moment, it's a timing issue too. Sometimes, especially with public concern about AI and that sort of thing, there has to be a very thoughtful way of engaging the community and talking about these things. So I'm actually taking cues from other folks at the moment and saying, we're going to keep this co-production with certain folks, and then we'll think about kind of engaging the broader community about how, and that might result in some missteps. I think the people that I work with are very careful people as well, and so we're hopeful that it has a good community outcome as well. Does that kind of answer your question? Maybe I kind of sidestepped it.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, I know it's a very complicated, issue. And obviously, I think I'm not an expert in Detroit, but I think a lot of these houses probably in neighborhoods that are historically being, like marginalized and all of that, right? And I think that's also would be one of the main concerns, like when folks in these communities lose like that touch with someone actually coming to the neighborhood and looking at houses. Now we have, this thing called AI who we can't even get in touch with, right? Like what's going to be what's that going to reproduce, right? Are we going to be reproducing like another like redlining, output, right? So, but I know I acknowledge the difficulty in,
What I would tell you is that the city has already said that when they do these assessments, they think that is part of the process, is actually going out to the community and engaging with folks. Excuse me. And that was one of the ideas about this, is to say, hey, maybe we can target specific locations that we think we should kind of have this liaison between the city and, I think city budgets are complex things, and we'll see if that's actually possible.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Jared, can I just add something to that? We use the language of assessment, but actually one of the main uses that the city is going to have for the data is not to assess the property value. It's really to determine that somebody's living in the house, so they're counted in the census. So, Yusuf, your point is very well taken. I mean, more community outreach is necessary, but it's ultimately to make sure that everybody's counted properly, not to take something away and redline and that kind. But the technology can obviously be used for different purposes. That's the purpose that the city is using it for right now.
Yep. Here. Thank you for the presentation. Question, do you look at, or have you looked at enhancing your model or enhancing the insights from leveraging other data sets, such as maybe U.S. postal data, vehicle registrations, or deliveries, or other indicators of human presence?
Yes, we have, and that. So within this co-production, the city is also doing that, okay? So we see this vision model as supporting some of those efforts, but I think there isn't an appetite. There are certain data sets that a city cannot share with even universities, because it's just, there are certain particular sensitivities around it. So the city is doing certain efforts to also model these things and try to understand this. When we look at just the conditions of the house, it's really hard to understand if there's people living in there. And so I think we would never only use this data point for that. And so I think the city itself is interested in kind of a deeper and enhancing that model. So yeah, very good question.
Hi. I think part of your research was talking about how some of the neighborhoods become empty and then they move to city and they become saturated in one place. I think my curiosity is about it's like a disease, we're treating symptoms but not the actual disease. I guess my question is, you develop machine learning models essentially is to study this data and learn something. What would you say is your ultimate goal of your model, and how do you go about looking at the pattern instead of just symptoms and stuff like that? Like, for example, if you apply the same model in Ann Arbor, you can probably find homes that have holes in bad structure, but Ann Arbor is it's a pretty safe city. It's known to have good economic systems and stuff like that, good school systems. That's what I'm really curious about, actually.
So you were talking a little bit softly, and I think what your question was, what is my ultimate goal?
Yeah.
Is it the scientific goal in addition to the goal of supporting the city in making these decisions, or?
I guess we can divide it two parts. What would you say is the ultimate focus of the model of the system? And what you learn from the model, how do you think that could improve the gaps that we see in neighborhoods like in Detroit?
I think to answer that question, I would kind of direct you back to this idea of actionable knowledge, okay? So, sorry. My research is really about how we're going to address increasing frequency and intensity of stressors, and how we can support decision making regarding that, okay? So cities have these really kind of intersecting and overlapping challenges, okay? One of them is the city's capacity to understand their infrastructure and their housing and that sort of thing. Cities have different capacities for that. Detroit is a good example of a city with great capacity to do that, okay? With increasing stressors, there's going to be more acute challenges related to flooding. In the Great Lakes, we're talking about ice storms, tornadoes, these kinds of things. And I think by building these models, I think what we're trying to do is to add onto those layers of understanding so that we can address these kind of intersecting problems that we face as a society. I think I don't think we're going to solve all these problems, but I think we can support. And kind of the reorientation of our research is to say, well, we could just stop and we could publish that paper and say, hey, we did a really good job. We can identify this. This is great. But I think a lot of science is saying, well, what? If somebody just writes that in a paper, what good is it? So the idea is to say, not only should we improve those models, but also think about how that works and how folks can use that in support of the challenges that they have. Okay.
What I was saying is one thing I admire about the model is it's community focused, it's society focused.
Okay, yeah, great, thank you so much.
I have a question, if no one else does. And this might be a bit of a loaded question because I've been involved in some of the conversations with you and with the city and some of the other collaborators. But AI is inherently, or the success of AI is inherently based on how big your data set is, how good your data set is. And Detroit City has a really great data set. It's got data for all of these houses. But the problem isn't just a problem that Detroit faces. Mm-hmm. Vacancy, blight, census tract data is a problem across multiple cities, across not just the US, but globally. How do we overcome that problem in areas where they might not have such rich data as Detroit does, for example?
Mm-hmm. I think you probably know. Well, there's this idea of kind of transferring our knowledge of one location to another. As a geographer, what the problem with that is that we know that the conditions can be very specific to a city, so that's a challenge, okay? What a lot of the effort has been is in what is called annotation. So you have to have assessors that actually look at those images and say what that is, okay? So a lot of the efforts in AI are actually doing that, and that some of it is doing to language, some of it is doing with sounds, all sorts of different things. So I think universities can play a critical role, first of all, about creating these data sets that are directed towards real life challenges that cities face. Midas is a good example of that, trying to create and curate these data sets, but then also making them available to folks. So we're going to need, so I think universities still need funds to do some of this work and direct it in ways that we think is societally beneficial. So I think we need to have these training data sets that reflect some of these societal problems, and we have to, as universities, we have to create these and curate them, because that will shape how AI is actually putting out knowledge. Okay? So I think we need to do those, and the idea, at the moment, we have money to do some annotation, so we're going to talk with the city and we're going to say, hey, what are the other things that we should look at within these photographs? Is there something that the city would find valuable in grabbing? Is it about the sidewalks? Could we make a data set where we get assessors to look at the sidewalks and then understand what's going on in that data set? But we're going to probably need more money to do that because it's quite a labor-intensive task. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. So I had a specific question. How can you use this data and this partnership with the city to also include the nonprofits that augment all the social services? You know, housing is one thing, and housing density, it's so important to have this information about what is the potential housing density, having all this data about how many vacant lots in what areas. But the other two areas where Detroit really suffers in social services, one is food insecurity.
Okay.
So 35 to 40% of the children that attend school in the city of Detroit actually have some kind of food assistance, and independent organizations like Gleaners and Second Harvest and things like that, they don't have access to this data. So how could they be included? And then the other side is in healthcare. There are federally funded health clinics, but there's also 6 to 8 to 10 different what we call free and charitable clinics that they cover the people who actually are uninsurable. Mm-hmm. And they have none of this data to know where should they locate, how much capacity they should have for health, for dental, for vision. Can you give some insight to that and how they can be included? Because what you're talking about, this housing, that's a longer term thing to support the gentrification of the city, but they have much bigger social problems right now.
Yeah, that's a large question.
Are nonprofits being included in this partnership, or is there too much privacy involved, or other hurdles?
Yes, the second one. So these data sets, there are some data sets that the city has graciously shared with us, but we don't share those. And the other, I think that you're correct that this has wider implications and that other folks could benefit from this. Okay. So at the moment, in the co-production process, I think what we learned is that we want to be careful about publishing this work because some of the people over here already said, okay, so these models are not always good. Okay. So, and I have a lot of experience with working with models with the public, and so it's really hard to communicate that uncertainty. Okay, so when you publish real data on specific locations, it sometimes sets off alarm bells, and so that is something that we're very sensitive to. So making this fully public is something that we're basically taking baby steps with. Yeah, and I think we are really invested in the cities and this relationship, so we're trying to be very careful about sharing this data as well. Does that, I totally agree that there would be other applications for that.
I have a question. I was curious if you all looked at like data sets in the past. So like there are a couple. I know. So I'm at Data Driven Detroit. I think we've done it before. But we, long before I was there, we did a full city like. Took photographs and did some labeling. I can't remember if the labeling lines up with the things that you all are trying to do, but we have like, every parcel in the city. But it's now, 10 years old at least, right? And so I don't know if something like that, if it were made available to as like a training set or whatever, if that is too far out of band, in terms of the distribution of the images, or if it would be something that
that's a really good question. It also addresses my colleague's question as well, is that we need data richness to be able to make these models. The goal was to fit within the city's data pipelines, right? So they have very specific criteria that they already have assessed. And so with other curated data sets, you have to see if that actually fits and then how that fits, right? So maybe you're looking at other things like, I don't know, whether the bushes are overgrown or something like that. That is not something that the city has used in their assessment. So I think as we go forward, we want to broaden and try to understand more things about what we can do with these models. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're true to this kind of data pipeline that they already have. The other question is, and I think you're talking kind of like this longitudinal study, right? Like understanding the evolution of some of these building conditions. And that is something that the city is very interested in. And I think from a scientific perspective, I'm very interested in that because we want to know, it's a tragic thing, right? You see these well-kept houses and what happened in those situations, right? There's people living there. I think it's kind of incumbent on us to try to understand what's going on? What is the long-term evolution? And I don't want to be prescriptive about that or say this is some social determinant, but there's got to be some underlying factors that maybe societally we can intervene in to think about not getting to that place.
Let's stop right here. We're right on time. And so thank you so much for the lecture, and thank you so much for being such an engaged audience.
Thank you.